This is an important book because it draws on a breadth and depth, a lifetime, in fact, of research into what makes the public service work. I can't overemphasize how important it is to get this kind of perspective when you are trying to influence your government stakeholders. So often I encounter folks who want to be influencing government staff, and they are drawing on anecdotal experience to make judgments about communication strategies to use. When you are thinking about your knowledge mobilization strategy and your communication strategy, treat that with the same kind of diligence that you would use in your actual research that you're mobilizing. You need to think a little bit like a market researcher and really take a close look at who your audience is, what motivates them, what's going on in their world. I want to share with you a couple of insights that I took from this book at a very high level, and then a quick thought about what to do with those insights in your knowledge mobilization work. The first insight I took from this book is that the public service divides into two groups of people whom Savoie calls the poets and the plumbers. The poets are the policymakers, the policy analysts. The plumbers are the people who actually deliver services. So at one point he talks about a prison warden, for instance. A prison warden would be a plumber. Somebody who writes policy regarding prisons would be a poet. So really important when you're thinking about communicating with government or with your government stakeholders to identify whether they're a poet or a plumber, because they have very, very different world views. The second point is that being a federal servant means operating in a very complex environment that's much more complex than it was 40 or 50 years ago. So while the lines of reporting might be clear, there are often many masters to serve because perhaps as the world becomes more complex, often a policy that you might think belongs to one department actually has to be signed off on by multiple departments. I'm going to use something very simple, which may be even simplistic. So please know I did not take this from Savoie's book. Let's say 40 years ago, you wanted to put a highway through an area where there wasn't really a population. Well, I'm thinking that you would just go through whatever department handles highways, like Department of Public Works or Department of Transportation. But now that decision would also have to take into account probably the environment, right? There may also be a need to look at whether indigenous lands are affected by this. So that could be another department that's involved, and so on and so forth. So it's a very complex, very complicated, that makes it certainly hard to navigate as an outsider, but it also must make it very challenging as a public servant. In fact, one of the metaphors that Savoie uses is Plato's allegory of the cave. He talks about federal bureaucrats who are currently working in the public service as existing in the back of Plato's cave. They can't see the world where things are well lit and revealed. And he says repeatedly that often people who've left the public service will come out with these insights or these criticisms, but only after they've left, because while you're in that environment, things are dark and shadowy and murky because they are so complex. So what do we do with this information? It's not going to give you a paint by number in terms of how to influence the public service. That is not at all the intention of this book. But what I think it can do is allow us to empathize with those government stakeholders. When we are trying to share information, share research to make something happen, it's so easy to fall into what I call an us versus them attitude. It's easy to get frustrated with those people who aren't receiving the information the way you'd like them to receive it, those people who are, resisting being educated. But frustration will not get you very far at all as a communicator. To succeed as a communicator, one of the foundational elements you need is empathy. So, the more we can learn about what this complex world is like, the better we can empathize with it, the better we can then build relationships, get insight, and get things